Tim Lewis, and I'm owner of Lewis Farms Nursery and Produce, and here in Elko. And I oversee this huge plantation. I'm kidding about that. It's very small, but we have 2 greenhouses and a high tunnel for produce production. And today's topic is very appropriate because it deals with the aspects of high rainfall and all the things that go with that. The plants are affected in 3 ways. There's disease pressure, and there's insect pressure, and of course there's weed pressure. As you can see out here, if you look out across the garden here, you'll see what the weeds have done. It rains almost every other day here for the last month or 2, and as a result, it's very difficult for me to get in the garden with a tiller or even a hoe and get rid of the weeds. So the weeds have been a real problem for us. The more weeds you have, the more insect pressure you have, and that's a problem. And the insects very often are carriers of diseases, so it's kind of a vicious cycle. And along with the kinds of diseases that the insects carry, well, you have a root rot problem potential because of the excess moisture in the ground, and that causes the soil to be too wet. The plant roots suffer, they suffocate, root rot pathogens enter, and it's just a real problem for us. I almost like it better when we had dry summers because I had irrigation. I have irrigation set up here, drip tube irrigation, but I hadn't had to use it in probably since May. But I would rather have a dry summer actually, where I can water when I want to water, but we've had otherwise this season. One thing you can do is start out with using raised beds, and that's a way to raise up the soil level about 6 to 12 inches or so, and plant your plants on that bed. And if you do that, the soil will drain much better. The only drawback of that, or one drawback of a raised bed though, is that it's hard to weed that bed. You can't use a tiller in it because you'll flatten the bed back down to its original level, and it won't be a raised bed anymore. So you really have to consider using a raised bed. But another thing you can do is to harvest your produce in a timely fashion, because the longer the fruit or vegetable stays on the plant, the more aptly it's going to be affected by different fungi and bacteria and that kind of thing. For example, if you ever grown bell peppers, you'll see the longer the bell pepper stays on the plant, the more likely it is to get a bad spot on it, which is caused by bacteria or fungus. So if you harvest in a timely fashion, that'll help a lot too. I made myself some notes here. Another thing you can do is mulch. Mulch, 2 to 4 inch layer of mulch on the ground around the plants will serve as somewhat of a barrier between the soil and the plant leaves, because a lot of times when it rains or when you irrigate, the splashing water will bring the soil-borne disease spores up to the plant leaves and cause leaf spots and all kinds of problems there. Keep plants off the ground if possible. Staking them, for example, you'd always need to stake tomatoes when you grow tomatoes. Apply fungicides, another way to do it, and also fertilize in a timely way if you can get in the garden to do it. So all those are different ways you can help the situation. Most plants will just like a moderate moisture in the soil, and even like it on the dry side, because the soil being on the dry side will discourage the pathogens in the soil, the fungi, and they therefore keep down the root rots and so forth. But there are some plants who actually prefer a wetter soil. And I made a list here of some of those, and I'm sure that I just listed the most common ones that you're probably familiar with because there's a long list of them. Number one is the hibiscus. The hibiscus, when I grow those in the greenhouse here, we have to keep those a little bit more moist than the other plants, because they actually like the extra moisture. Another one is a shrub arborvitae. Arborvitaes prefer a little more moist conditions too. There's trees like eastern hemlock and certain dogwoods and maples. A lot of those larger trees. Perhaps their native habitat would be on a river bank or a creek bank, and therefore they're used to that. Blueberries, believe it or not, actually like a lot of good bit of water. Certain spireas, which are early spring blooming shrubs. Astilbe, which is a perennial. Daylilies prefer a moist soil, and there's certain irises. Another perennial that prefers on the moist side is bee balm. And then of course there's certain ferns, like the woodland type ferns, like cinnamon ferns and Japanese ferns and others that prefer a moist, shady environment like their natural habitat would be. One thing I have in my hand is a hoe. Now a hoe, I got the feeling, is kind of a tool that we don't use much anymore, but they still do make them and sell them. You know, when I was a boy, right here in this same place, my daddy made me use it, and we had a good sized garden, and we used a hoe. So one way to cut down on your weed pressure in the garden, especially in times like these where we have a lot of rainfall and it's hard to get in there and use a tiller, is just use a hoe. Well, another thing is a good tiller. Now, if you're able to space your rows wide enough to accommodate a tiller, either a front tine or a rear tine tiller, then that's an excellent tool. And in the past years, that's what we've used, and this year has not worked out very well because it's just hard to get in the garden because of so much rain. It's just too wet. But in a normal year, we use a tiller. We go right alongside the plant in the row, and when the weeds are real small, we're able to get those, and it cuts down tremendously on the weed pressure. So those are some ways to do that. Speaking of the irrigation, we do have drip irrigation here, and you see a line right here that I put in. We have rows every 4 feet, and we have a drip tube line on every row, and most of these plants that we grow have a drip tube line that has a hole about every either 12 inches or 18 inches, and we put the plant right there by the hole. Is where the water drips out. So we have a valve, a cutoff valve also. We see this green valve here is a cutoff, cut the owner off. And this is a 1-inch PVC line, and I put it on a timer, and we can fertilize through it or just use plain water. So it's really, really convenient, and it conserves moisture because instead of using a sprinkler, overhead sprinkler, save a lot of water. And you also cut down on the disease problem because the foliage does not get wet as it would with an overhead type sprinkler. So this is an excellent method here. I like to fertilize through the irrigation instead of using granular fertilizer also. Mushrooms have been a lot more prevalent this season because of all the rain. And I'm going to kind of concentrate on the mushrooms, if I might, in this answer. And here I have in my hand a typical mushroom. I'm not sure what exact species it is or if it's edible or anything. I don't take any chances on that. But this is a mature mushroom, and you see the gills underneath. This indicates it's mature, and the spores have probably already been released, thousands of them, into the air and into the soil, surrounding soil. So when conditions get right, they'll germinate and form new mushrooms. For one thing, you'll never be able to completely eradicate the mushroom. Mushrooms like a shady, moist environment. So if you cut some limbs and to let the sunlight in, that will help eradicate or prevent some. Also, you can aerate the lawn. Mushrooms like a stable, organic environment. for example, when you cut the grass and you leave some clippings, a lot of extra clippings on top of the ground, they love that because that's where they breed and grow. So if you aerate the lawn, provide more air to the soil, that will help a good bit too. One thing, do not overwater, because it has been a problem this season. You could agree with that. And the last thing is, the simplest thing is just to, when you see mushrooms in the lawn or wherever you might see them, just take a hoe, cut them down, pull them up, or just kick them with your foot, get rid of them. That's what I do. Burn over with a lawnmower, just get rid of them. That'll help. It make you feel good too when you're doing something like that, to get rid of them. So, otherwise, I will touch on the other part of that question, was the mold and fungus. You can use a fungicide in some cases on the lawn or in the garden to help prevent problems with disease. And I won't go into a list of fungicides or anything, but just know that you can use fungicides to help reduce or prevent that kind of problem. Usually not a curative thing, it's more of a preventative measure.